Hello, I'm Claire Pryde and you're watching The Political Brief. Coming up, taking the bull by the horns, Emmanuel Macron talks to angry farmers at the Paris Agricultural Show. Prevent to protect, that's the name of France's latest deradicalization plan. It's the third in 4 years. And Marion Maréchal Le Pen, the niece of France's far-right leader, shares the stage with conservatives in the US. First, an update on a story we covered last week, the government's plans for heavily indebted national rail operator SNCF. Well, it's now official. The government does indeed want to quickly push through changes by decree. That's angered trade unions, and we'll find out on the 15th of March about possible strike action. The reforms include cutting the special employment status of rail workers, but not shutting small local lines, as recommended in the government commissioned report we mentioned last week.
The world is changing. The SNCF must change with it. In the face of its competitors, SNCF cannot remain the only one to recruit under the special rail worker status. So, to the new generations, to apprentices, to all those who want to get involved with the SNCF, we say that they will benefit from the working conditions of all French people, those of the Labour Code. In the future, on a date to be agreed upon, there will no longer be any recruitment under the status.
Edouard Philippe, Laurent Wauquiez, Marine Le Pen and even Emmanuel Macron himself, France's top politicians showing up at the Paris Agricultural Show this week. Some going several times. Why? Well, the French countryside is still an important part of the national identity, and French farmers are struggling to adapt to a changing market. Macron, whose supporters are mainly urban, beat his predecessor's record by half an hour, staying 12 hours and 30 minutes. But it wasn't smooth sailing, as Shirley Sitbin reports.
Promising to take a pet chicken into the presidential palace, talking to cows and roosters, and taking the usual selfies with the crowd. Those are some of the things President Macron did on his first visit to the annual Paris Agriculture Fair, a closely watched key moment for French presidents. But Macron's efforts failed to charm everyone. The French president was heckled by groups of farmers worried about their future. Producer prices are down, many farmers are barely making a living. And now Europe is planning a new trade deal with South American countries whose products are cheaper and do not have to comply with the same quality standards. Instead of ignoring the hecklers like some of his predecessors, Macron defended his policies, including a ban on glyphosate pesticides.
If I don't ban glyphosate, one day, farm workers and consumers will find me and say, "You knew it was dangerous. You failed to act."
Calm down. We're calm.
You yelled at me.
The French president wants to invest 5 billion euros in agriculture and set minimum prices so farmers don't sell at a loss.
We want action this time, not just promises.
Once again, farmers will have to wait and see if the president stays true to his word and if his policies can save the sector after decades of decline.
Now, 4 months after tough new anti-terror laws came into force, the French government has unveiled a new deradicalization plan. There are 60 measures, and they focus in large part on schools and prisons. For example, making it harder for schools with no links to the Education Ministry to open, and placing imprisoned extremists in separate blocks. Yenna Lee reports.
Prevent to protect. That's the name of the French government's latest program to fight against extremism. This is the third such plan in 4 years, but Prime Minister Edouard Philippe wants to take it further from the usual talk on crime and punishment. This 60-point program puts emphasis instead on prevention, advocacy and reintegration. Education is a major element of the plan. The government wants to inspect private schools more closely and make critical thinking an integral part of school programs to arm students against conspiracy theories. The French state also wants to hold internet companies accountable for not taking down illicit content. As for those who are already radicalized, Philippe has promised to create additional places in prisons to deal with inmates with extremist tendencies.
We will create 1,500 places in our prisons, places that will be designated for radicalized inmates, starting with 450 by the end of this year. Those who are deemed particularly dangerous will be housed in areas with violent criminals, which will guarantee that they will be sealed off from the others.
Monitoring will be reinforced in prisons, schools, as well as in the sports and health sectors. The ultimate goal is to make sure everyone is able to spot and stop the early signs of radicalization.
There's a slight delay, but France's Gender Equality Minister Marlène Schiappa says a bill on sexism and sexual violence will be brought before a cabinet meeting at the end of March. She was given a report this week that recommends fining men €90 for making lewd comments about women in public. And I'm joined now in the studio by Philip Turle from our sister radio station RFI. Hello, Philip. Thanks for coming in. Could you start off by telling us a bit more about these measures?
Well, this is the follow-up to all the outcry that was caused by the Harvey Weinstein affair in the United States. And many women have come forward in France to say, well, it not only happens in the US, it's also happening in France. And there's been a campaign which has started in this country which is called Balance ton porc, which means basically reveal who your pig is if you're being sexually molested or people are making rude and lewd remarks to you. So this has put pressure on the government to come up with a series of measures to try to stop this kind of what they say is totally unacceptable behaviour in public places, in public transport. So these propositions, these measures that have been given to the government, which, as you said, are going to be discussed in the Council of Ministers meeting at the end of March, will maybe be signed into law by the summer, and they are going to make it illegal to whistle at women or make lewd comments in public or touch somebody in public transport. If that is seen by a policeman, then the person can complain about that and take the person to court.
You mentioned Me Too. Marlène Schiappa says that it's not really about fining a lot of people, it's about changing mentalities here in France.
Well, that's the bottom line. I was talking to one of the heads of the police unions in France when these measures were announced, and he said it's going to be virtually impossible for us to make sure that they're respected because police are already very busy doing lots of other things. But what it might do is to make those who think they are in a position of freedom to do what they like, maybe will make them think twice about making some kind of comments in public or trying to sexually molest a woman in public transport or in the street. And I think the bottom line is, let's make it illegal. Let's make people think twice. All this impunity that France has had for years and which has been pretty much accepted by most people, I think, especially men, is now coming to an end, and it will be that most men will now have to think twice if they want to make a remark because they might be fined for it.
Now, the people putting bills together, politicians, they're not exactly exemplary. We've seen that in Parliament a few times. And then, of course, there are two ministers who've been accused of sexual misconduct.
Well, there are two ministers in the current government who've been accused of it. They haven't been found guilty yet. One is Gérald Darmanin, and the other one is the man who's really France's most popular minister, who is Nicolas Hulot, a former television presenter. And there's been a case brought back of what they say is sexually attacking a woman, a rape claim, which has been thrown out. But this has been on the front page of one of the magazines in France called Hebdo. Many people say the magazine's trying to make a story out of this to sell magazines. But Nicolas Hulot is said to be very upset about these revelations, which he said no longer valid. But it still brings suspicion on ministers, and it's not the first time this has happened in France. And in the National Assembly itself, there have been cases of female ministers who've gone up to talk and have been whistled at by other ministers. One was Cécile Duflot, a former ecology minister, who was whistled at because of the dress she was wearing, and others have had noises like hens pecking made by other deputies. So yesterday, a former minister called Roselyne Bachelot, who was a health minister, whom I was talking to about this, said the problem in France is that we need to sweep outside our own front door in the National Assembly before we can push through measures like this. But these measures are welcome, and these measures might be a start to changing the mentality in France.
Thank you very much, Philip. Now, a year and a half after retiring from politics in France, Marion Maréchal Le Pen has made a comeback in the US. Even more right-wing and socially conservative than her aunt Marine Le Pen, the 28-year-old had been seen as the rising star of the far-right National Front. Now that she's shared a stage with Mike Pence and Donald Trump, and with her aunt in a weaker position, there's speculation Marion Maréchal Le Pen is planning to run for president in 2022. Our team in Washington sent us this report.
This is the biggest stage for conservative politics in the US. Marion Le Pen brought her own brand of, for want of a better word, Trumpism.
Bonjour, c'est Pâques. I want America first for the American people. I want Britain first for the British people. And I want France first for the French people.
The niece of Marine Le Pen received applause for her attacks on the European Union and on what she calls Islamic lobbies. Her far-right campaign-style speech convinced those who discovered the youngest Le Pen for the first time.
We need to convey our ideal through the media.
I thought it was marvelous. Vive la France. They need a French Tea Party like we have.
She is absolutely amazing. She has the right idea, the right perspective on what is the problem happening worldwide.
I think we all agree we're trying to protect our countries from globalization and from the Islamic threat. So even if we don't agree, we're aligned in the goal, and it was great.
There was no mention of a potential return to politics to fill the gap in the National Front Party left by her aunt. Marion Le Pen isn't the only European populist at CPAC this year. There's also Nigel Farage, the Brexit leader, or Sebastian Gorka, the former White House advisor, and American conservative favourites, of course, like the head of the National Rifle Association. The man who extended the controversial invitation to Le Pen was Matt Schlapp, the organizer.
There's no question that we have been attacked by some conservatives and some Republicans. What's interesting to me is most of the criticisms that have been leveled about Ms. Le Pen are criticisms of her grandfather or her aunt or the political party she was associated with and maybe still is associated with.
Plenty of Republicans decided not to come to this conservative gathering. One strategist telling us that she didn't want to support Marion Le Pen and the French National Front in that way.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching. Do join us again next week. We'll leave you with some images of the Paris Agricultural Show.